So I guess it's about time we talk about wok technique. See, recently we had a chat with Kenji and we talked about Chinese food, cooking, authenticity, and a bunch of random stuff. You can check out the complete conversation over at Kenji's channel, and we'll also link it at the end of the video. In it, we also talk about how to stir fry, and we think it may be interesting to expand a little bit on that, show you some basic technique, and also a bit on how Kenji view things. Now, about a year ago, we walked through the basic stir-fry steps using the classic pork slivers and pepper. So this time, we'll be focusing on a couple key ideas on how to stir-fry using a wok. But right, before we get started...
First, Longyau. Get your wok piping hot, shut off the heat, add in the oil, here about 1 tablespoon, and give it a swirl to get a nice nonstick surface.
We say this sentence in almost every video. The term is Cantonese. Long means swirl and yao means oil. Together, the term means swirling oil in the wok. What it does is that it gives you a non-stick surface to stir fry in and also consistently preheating the wok. But Longyau does refer to a restaurant technique at its core. So what they would do at a restaurant would be first, 把锅烧热, as demonstrated by everyone's favorite chef, Wang Gang. That means heating up the wok. And then they will add in at least a cup of oil into the wok, give it a swirl, and then pour it back out into the oil bowl. And then next they will put in fresh, cool stir-fry oil and then start the process. But while we started doing that, we eventually realized that it will be easiest for us and also our audience to simply swirl the oil you will be using in stir-fried. In hindsight, it's actually in essence the same with Chinese home cook's mantra, 热锅凉油, which means when stir-frying, your wok should be really hot and you will be adding in room temperature oil and then you add in the aromatics immediately. So sometimes Chris said maybe we shouldn't call this Longyau because after all, this is not exactly what restaurants does. But I think as long as you get some yao and you long it, and I think this process is still Longyau. Now you might ask, how hot is hot when heating up the wok? Well, we took the temperature before. It should be above at least 200 degrees Celsius. When you add your oil in, it should have some smoke coming out. Or according to the Leidenfrost effect, when you drop a couple drops of water in, the droplet should be able to hover around the surface instead of disappearing right away. So no need to heat your wok on high for 5 minutes. We're not aiming to set the oil on fire. Now, after we Longyau and start frying the aromatics, we'll often swirl some liaojiu, aka Shaoxing wine, over the spatula and around the sides of the wok. Later in the stir fry, we'll also repeat the same motion with soy sauce or even vinegar. This will prevent the liquid from pooling at the bottom of the wok, but Kenji also pointed out another aspect of it.
So what you're talking about is like swirling it around the outside of the wok. That it's not just about not cooling down the center of the wok. So when you add soy sauce or Shaoxing or Laojiao to the edges of the wok, it actually changes the flavor of it more than it does if you just pour it over the food in the middle, because it kind of sears the sauce. Which is, I was surprised that it made such a big difference. But if you do it side by side, it's a pretty significant difference.
Now, we use one of these things to do this motion. We always call it a spatula, but it's actually called a wok tan. It's a little bit wider. So if you got something that's too small or is slotted, feel free to just use a spoon to do this motion. Sometimes we see people stir-frying online, and even at the first glance, you can tell a lot of them are crowding their wok. This matters is because if you put too much food in a small wok, the temperature wouldn't be high enough, and the food will release water over the long cooking period, and everything will end up steaming instead of stir-frying. So make sure your wok is over 35 centimeters wide. Many people tend to blame the mediocre stir fry on their stove, but actually what they should really watch for would be the wok and the portion size.
I guess I was saying is something that I feel like kind of gets mixed up and mixed together is like there's one concept which is wok hei, right? And then there's another concept which I think is a lot of people in the West trying to make really big stir fries, trying to basically be like a main with a really small wok and crowding the wok and then blaming their crowding the wok on lack of wok hei. Does that make sense? I feel like there's like two separate things.
Right, it's sort of two separate things. But it's also that like I mean, in the West, like, I mean, like, and I don't think most of us are familiar with like home style Chinese cooking, right? Because we don't experience Chinese cooking at people's homes. We experience it at Chinese restaurants, which is why like people here have this obsession with like recreating those restaurant style flavors,
So to me, wok hei is the taste from this very high temperature of this very hot dish that is straight out from a restaurant kitchen, and the browning of it and the taste of a very well seasoned restaurant wok.
Right. It's kind of I sort of think of it as like it's kind of like you don't expect every steak to taste like it was broiled under like an 1800 Fahrenheit restaurant style salamander. That's like a specific restaurant thing, and like if you're cooking a steak at home, you expect it to be a different thing from what you're getting at a restaurant. Is that sort of like the
Yeah, like you cook at home, it's like something different than what you get at a restaurant. But should you invest in a restaurant setup at home? As Chef Wang Gang explained in his Building a Kitchen video, it will be pretty unrealistic and pricey to do so at home. So if you're just making a weeknight meal, no need to be obsessed about it. Just Longyau, swirl the liquid in, don't crowd your wok, you will have a perfectly delicious stir fry. But what if you are one of the truly obsessives and you really want to mimic Cantonese restaurants' taste? Maybe you can try Kenji's method with an outdoor burner, which we think is a pretty decent middle ground between a professional kitchen setup and home cooking.
And that's one of the things that I like to try and capture at home. Of course, it is very possible to cook indoors in a wok on a home burner. Most people in China don't own restaurant burners unless they're at a restaurant. So you don't need a wok burner to make good Chinese food, but if you want to make that restaurant style stuff, it helps. And what I found interesting talking to you guys was that it really put into perspective for me how much my perception of Chinese food is based on growing up in the U.S., where pretty much all of my early experiences with Chinese food were restaurant-style Cantonese dishes, and all the flavors associated with that, which is only a small part of. I mean, China's huge. I mean, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but but I think a lot of people like me who grew up in the U.S. Are used to have their view of Chinese food colored by this sort of experience with Cantonese style restaurant food, because Cantonese immigrants were the first immigrants in the U.S. and so they've had sort of an outsized influence on in what we in the U.S. know as Chinese food.
So right, hope this discussion on wok technique can clear some fog for you. Again, you can check out the complete conversation over at Kenji's channel, link here. And of course, thank you for everyone that's supporting us on Patreon. And don't forget to subscribe for more Chinese cooking videos.